It's not paranoia if it's true. Welcome to Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski.
I'm Tony Brueski, and today we're diving headfirst into the chaotic first day of the Sarah Boone trial. The woman accused of locking her boyfriend Jorge Torres Jr. in a suitcase and leaving him to suffocate. After 4.5 years of delays, countless legal twists, and 9 different attorneys, day one in court wasted no time delivering some jaw-dropping moments. Prosecutors came out swinging with hard evidence, and the defense countered with a controversial strategy that could either set Boone free or bury her under the weight of her own testimony. In this episode, we'll break down everything that happened in court today, every word from the opening statements, the first key moments where Boone's defense introduced their battered spouse syndrome claim, and how prosecutors unleashed the chilling videos Boone recorded on her phone. And the stakes? Boone is facing the ultimate decision. Does she take the stand and risk cross-examination, or stay silent and leave the jury guessing? This trial isn't just about what happened that night. It's about unraveling the lies, the motives, and the toxic relationship that led them here. So buckle up. We're about to walk you through every twist and turn of a trial that's only just begun. The long-awaited trial of Sarah Boone, accused of second-degree murder for the death of her boyfriend Jorge Torres Jr., began today after years of delays. Opening arguments set the stage for a gripping courtroom drama that left no time for subtlety. Both sides delivered sharp, high-stakes narratives. For Boone, her freedom now hinges on convincing the jury that Torres' death was a tragic consequence of self-defense, not murder. But it quickly became clear that the defense's approach, arguing battered spouse syndrome, would face fierce opposition from prosecutors armed with disturbing video evidence. Boone's defense attorney, James Owens, began with a bold opening statement, arguing that Boone's actions that night were those of a woman in fear for her life. Owens told the jury that Boone and Torres had a violent, alcohol-fueled relationship, one marked by escalating abuse that trapped Boone in a cycle of survival. What happened inside that suitcase was not murder, Owens claimed. It was the final, desperate attempt of a battered woman to protect herself. However, Assistant State Attorney William J. offered a different story, a grim narrative centered on Boone's alleged malice. In his opening argument, J. detailed how Boone trapped Torres in a suitcase, taunted him as he begged for help, and then left him to die. According to J., Boone's actions were deliberate, calculated, and born out of anger, not fear. This case isn't about self-defense, J. argued. It's about punishment, a cruel, fatal punishment. The courtroom went silent as Jay revealed the prosecution's most damning evidence. 2 videos recovered from Boone's phone, both recorded during the final moments of Torres' life. The first video showed Torres trapped inside the suitcase, pleading for his life. "I can't breathe," he cried, his voice panicked. Boone's response, heard clearly on the recording, was chilling. "Yeah. That's what you do when you choke me. For everything you've done to me, fuck you!" The second shorter video showed Torres still inside the suitcase, weakly calling Boone's name. Prosecutors argued that the 2 videos, recorded 11 minutes apart, demonstrated Boone's intent to harm rather than protect herself. They painted a picture of someone who was fully aware of Torres' suffering and yet made the conscious choice to leave him there. The jury's faces were grim as the videos played. Jurors were visibly disturbed by the footage. Some exchanged uneasy glances, while others scribbled notes. From the outset, it was clear that these recordings would be the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. After the videos played, Owens worked to shift the jury's focus away from the cold, hard evidence toward the psychological underpinnings of Boone's behavior. He argued that the history of abuse Boone endured distorted her sense of danger and left her with limited options in moments of conflict. To support this argument, the defense referenced incidents in which Torres had been arrested for domestic violence against Boone. Owens told the jury that Boone's mental state had been shaped by years of fear, suggesting that the suitcase incident occurred in the context of survival. But Owens faced a critical challenge. Without Boone's testimony, the defense would struggle to meet the legal standard required for battered spouse syndrome. Judge Michael Kranick reminded Owens that an overt act of violence by Torres must be established to justify Boone's claim of self-defense, and since there were no eyewitnesses, Boone's own words could be the only way to provide that missing link. The defense also introduced the possibility that Torres became violent when intoxicated, and both he and Boone had been drinking wine heavily that night. Owens hinted that Boone used the suitcase to block an attack and protect herself, but prosecutors quickly dismissed this narrative as implausible, given the videos and the fact that Boone went to sleep after locking Torres in the suitcase. One of the most suspenseful moments of the day came when Owens acknowledged that Boone might take the stand. It's an unusual and risky move for defendants in high-profile murder trials, and Boone's testimony would come with substantial risks. Under cross-examination, prosecutors could exploit the inconsistencies in her statements and further undermine her credibility. But without her testimony, the jury may question the sincerity of her self-defense claim. During a courtroom break, reporters overheard Owens telling Boone that the decision to testify would ultimately be hers. This critical decision looms large over the trial, leaving both the defense and prosecution uncertain about how the case will unfold. Prosecutors wasted no time countering the defense's battered spouse syndrome strategy, bringing in outside commentary from legal experts familiar with such cases. One such expert, Jessica Mashali, who successfully defended a woman in a similar self-defense case earlier this year, stated that Boone's behavior didn't align with that of a typical battered spouse. Battered spouses don't go to sleep after harming someone, Mashali told reporters, and they certainly don't taunt their abuser while recording videos. This doesn't look like fear. It looks like control. The prosecution's argument resonated with the jury. As Jay reminded them, Boone's actions, mocking Torres while he suffocated and later falling asleep while he lay dying, didn't match the profile of a woman acting in genuine self-defense. This isn't about surviving, Jay concluded. It's about making sure Torres never hurt her again. Outside the courtroom, public interest in the case reached a fever pitch. Reporters from local and national outlets scrambled for interviews and sound bites. The trial's bizarre nature, ranging from Boone's decision to pursue a controversial defense to the chilling cell phone videos, captured public imagination, fueling heated debates on social media. Some sympathized with Boone, seeing her as a woman pushed to the brink by years of abuse. Others viewed her actions as premeditated and indefensible. The trial's first day ended with the sense that this would be no ordinary courtroom drama. Both sides had laid out their strategies, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The next steps, whether Boone would testify, how the defense would further develop their case, and what other surprises lay ahead, promised to keep everyone on edge. To understand how Sarah Boone and Jorge Torres Jr.'s relationship spiraled into tragedy, it's crucial to step back and explore their tumultuous history, one marked by cycles of abuse, toxic patterns, and escalating violence. Their story isn't just a snapshot of one fateful night. It's the product of years of conflict fueled by alcohol, volatile emotions, and a deeply dysfunctional dynamic that would ultimately end in death. Boone and Torres met in Winter Park, Florida, and those close to them described their relationship as stormy from the beginning. Friends recalled seeing glimpses of affection between the two, but those moments were often eclipsed by frequent arguments. Both had histories of troubled relationships. Boone had previously struggled with financial instability and relationship conflicts, while Torres had a documented history of violent outbursts, often intensified by alcohol. At first, Boone and Torres bonded over their shared love for nightlife, but what started as occasional wine nights soon became regular binge drinking, which intensified their arguments. It wasn't uncommon for neighbors to hear shouting from their apartment late at night, and police were called on several occasions for domestic disturbances. Torres' arrests for battery involving Boone provide a grim insight into their relationship's dark side. Police records reveal multiple incidents where Torres was taken into custody for assaulting Boone. In each case, Boone refused to press charges, allowing Torres to walk free and return to her life, a common pattern in abusive relationships where victims feel trapped by emotional dependence or fear of escalation. Photographs introduced during the trial show bruises and injuries Boone allegedly sustained at Torres' hands. Owens, Boone's defense attorney, used these images to argue that she was the victim of chronic abuse, trapped in a psychological cycle of fear. The defense aimed to establish that Boone's perception of danger was skewed by years of trauma, a key element for supporting the battered spouse syndrome defense. However, Torres' family painted a different picture. His relatives described him as someone who struggled with anger, but never intended to harm Boone. They claimed Boone often provoked Torres and used his temper against him in arguments. This conflicting narrative further muddied the waters, leaving the jury to decide which version of their relationship they believed. Alcohol played a central role in Boone and Torres' volatile relationship. On the night of the Suitcase incident, both had been drinking heavily, according to statements Boone made during police interviews. Owens argued that Torres became unpredictable and violent when intoxicated, suggesting that Boone feared for her safety that night. However, prosecutors pointed to Boone's decision to record the videos as evidence that her actions were deliberate rather than defensive. In their narrative, alcohol wasn't an excuse. It was an amplifier for Boone's anger, giving her the courage to act on her frustrations. This debate over alcohol's role in the incident became a key battleground in the trial. At the heart of Boone's defense lies the concept of battered spouse syndrome, a psychological condition recognized in legal settings to explain how prolonged abuse can distort a victim's perception of danger. According to Owens, Boone's behavior on the night of Torres' death, locking him in the suitcase and ignoring his pleas, should be understood through this lens. He argued that Boone's mind had been conditioned to react defensively, even if the immediate threat wasn't present. However, not all experts agreed with this assessment. Some questioned whether Boone fit the psychological profile of a battered spouse, given her behavior during and after the incident. Unlike typical victims of abuse who often act passively, Boone displayed a level of control and defiance that seemed inconsistent with someone living in fear. This contradiction became a focal point for the prosecution, who argued that Boone's actions were driven by malice, not survival. Boone's trial was marked by a revolving door of attorneys, each offering different strategies to defend her. At various points, Boone's legal team considered using intoxication as a defense, or arguing that Torres' death was a tragic accident during a drunken game of hide-and-seek. Ultimately, they settled on battered spouse syndrome, hoping that the psychological argument would resonate with the jury. However, this decision came with risks. To successfully argue battered spouse syndrome, the defense needed to establish that Torres made an overt act of aggression that prompted Boone's response. Without her testimony, this critical element would remain unproven. The evolving nature of Boone's defense created an additional layer of complexity, as prosecutors argued that the changes reflected a lack of credibility. Expert witnesses became pivotal in the trial, with both sides relying on psychological assessments to bolster their arguments. Dr. Michael Brannon, a forensic psychologist who previously testified in the high-profile Marsha Thompson case, was expected to provide expert testimony on battered spouse syndrome. His testimony would explain how repeated abuse can alter a person's response to conflict, making them perceive danger even when none exists. However, Judge Kranick ruled that Brannon's testimony could only be admitted if Boone testified and established the necessary overt act of aggression by Torres. This ruling placed additional pressure on Boone, as her defense strategy hinged on psychological evidence that couldn't be presented without her involvement. The prosecution, meanwhile, prepared their own psychological expert to evaluate Boone. They argued that Boone's behavior, especially her decision to film Torres while he was suffocating, indicated a level of premeditation inconsistent with the profile of a battered spouse. From the moment news of the Suitcase murder broke, the public was fascinated by the case's strange and unsettling details. Boone's story, filled with alcohol, abuse, and taunting videos, became a media sensation. Commentators speculated about Boone's motives, with some portraying her as a victim driven to extremes and others viewing her as a manipulative perpetrator. Social media platforms buzzed with debates as armchair detectives analyzed every piece of evidence. Some questioned whether Boone's decision to record the videos was a sign of malice or simply a bizarre coping mechanism. Others focused on the contradictions in her defense strategy, arguing that her shifting narratives undermined her credibility. The media attention only intensified as the trial approached, with reporters from around the world descending on Winter Park to cover the proceedings. The public's fascination with the case reflected broader societal debates about domestic violence, self-defense, and the limits of personal accountability. As the first day of the trial came to a close, both sides had laid the groundwork for what promised to be a gripping legal battle. The prosecution was determined to prove that Boone acted out of revenge, while the defense hoped to convince the jury that her actions were those of a woman pushed to the brink by years of abuse. With the possibility of Boone taking the stand hanging in the air, the trial's next phase promised to be even more dramatic. The jury would soon hear from law enforcement officers, forensic experts, and perhaps Boone herself, as each side worked to unravel the truth behind what happened the fateful night in 2020. The trial wasn't just about determining Boone's guilt or innocence. It was about answering deeper questions. When does fear turn into intent? How much can a person endure before they snap? And in a relationship marked by abuse, who holds the power in the end? And that was day one. I have to say, after listening to the evidence from the first day of Sarah Boone's trial, it's clear that this case is far from straightforward. On the surface, you have a woman arguing that she was a victim of years of abuse, someone who, in a moment of desperation, acted to protect herself. But the chilling footage of Jorge Torres Jr. trapped inside that suitcase and pleading for his life tells a story that's hard to dismiss. Was this self-defense? Or was this an act of revenge born from anger and frustration that had built up over years? Boone's defense is gambling on the jury believing that battered spouse syndrome distorted her perception of danger, that she locked Torres in the suitcase out of fear, not cruelty. But the prosecution is just as determined to show that Boone crossed a line. They argue that fear doesn't look like mocking your abuser on video, and it certainly doesn't look like going to sleep while they suffocate. This trial isn't just about what happened that night. It's about the fine line between victim and perpetrator, and whether Boone was justified or malicious in her actions. The key question moving forward is whether Boone will take the stand. If she does, she'll have the chance to tell the jury in her own words what happened and why. But it's a high-risk move. The inconsistencies in her previous statements will be laid bare under cross-examination, and if the jury senses even a hint of deception, the entire battered spouse defense could crumble. If she stays silent, though, the jurors are left with only the prosecution's damning evidence, those chilling videos, and the troubling question of why she didn't open that suitcase when Torres begged for his life. This case also forces us to confront deeper societal questions. What does it mean to be a victim of abuse? How do years of trauma shape someone's response in moments of conflict? And when does self-defense become indistinguishable from punishment? Boone's story isn't unique in its themes. Many people find themselves trapped in toxic, abusive relationships, but the way it has unfolded is nothing short of extraordinary. As we watch this trial progress, we're reminded of how complex the truth can be. The same person can be both a victim and a perpetrator. A relationship can be both loving and destructive. And justice? Justice in cases like these isn't just about determining guilt or innocence. It's about deciding where accountability lies in a situation where both people bear scars. In the days ahead, we'll learn more from expert witnesses, forensic analysts, and possibly Boone herself. Each new testimony will pull us deeper into the tangled web of Boone and Torres' relationship. But one thing is certain, this case challenges us to look beyond simple narratives of good and evil. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that human behavior is messy, complicated, and rarely fits neatly into legal definitions. So, where do we go from here? We wait for the next day in court, knowing that the truth, if there is such a thing, will reveal itself slowly, piece by piece, testimony by testimony. Will Sarah Boone's defense hold up under scrutiny, or will the prosecution prove that this was a deliberate act of vengeance hidden behind a claim of survival? I'm Tony Brueski. If you want to stay up to date on this case and others we cover, be sure to subscribe. because this story, it's only just beginning.
In a world where the darkest secrets lie just beneath the surface,
They said it was an accident, but the evidence says otherwise.
where hidden killers roam unnoticed in the shadows.
I think you would definitely be looking at a blend of toxic, very bad narcissistic personality traits, and they will be vengeful and possibly resort to violence.
Join Tony Brueski as he uncovers the truth behind the most chilling cases.
They said it was an accident, but the evidence clearly says otherwise.
Each episode, we dig deep into the minds of those who commit the unthinkable.
To your point on narcissism, he thinks in his own mind how witty he is.
Yeah.
But he lost that jury. I was done with him in 2 minutes.
From unsolved mysteries to infamous crimes.
Geez, you've just talked about how you've taught yourself how to do everything under the sun. I bet you did a YouTube video, how to best kill somebody with a knife.
Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski takes you where few dare to go.
How does someone with such a dark secret go unnoticed for so long?
With multiple new episodes every single day.
We're not just telling stories, we're seeking justice.
Listen now on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski.